Hello, my 11th graders. I hope you're all fine and your family is also fine. Today we are starting our class with the first section of Chapter 9, Washington's Presidency. Let's start the topic of today's class. As you know, in the previous lesson, we learned a new constitution that was approved in 1788 and it served as a guide for the new Republican government. Today we are going to learn about George Washington's presidency and his advisors and how they faced with some problems, challenges during his presidency. Washington's new government. The key question of this chapter is this, how did Washington's presidency shape new political traditions? With the Constitution approved, a president needed to be elected. On the contrary, in Europe, there was kingdom, and the king was not elected by people, but it was exactly opposite in the United States. The president had to be from people and for people. The first electoral college elected in that period, and George Washington was inaugurated, formally sworn. Inauguration means formally sworn. On April 30th, 1789 at the nation's capital in New York City. The presidential runner-up was John Adams, who became the first vice president. According to the Constitution, it was clear that the runner-up was supposed to be the vice president. So they competed with each other at the beginning, but later George Washington was elected as the president of the United States. Then John Adams served as his vice president. Washington knew his actions would set precedent, an example that becomes a standard for practice. What does it mean? It means that Washington knew that before him there was no president, there was no leader as a president, the one that is elected by people. So he knew that he was aware that his deeds are going to be considered as models for the coming presidents. This is this photo is John Adams, the vice president. We are going to concentrate on branches of United States government. The first Congress, legislative branch. Congress, both Senate and House of Representatives, met for the first time in April 1789. Senators wore wigs, lace, and velvet. The Senate was small, quiet, and proper. The first 5 years the sessions were private, but in 1794 a gallery was built for the public and press. The House of Representatives was more informal, welcoming the public and press from the onset beginning. So about Senate and the House of Representatives, you are supposed to know their differences. How House of Representative was kind of public branch, not a branch, but section, and how the other one was a kind of a private one for a short period of time. Members from the House were loud and even wore their hats inside the chamber. Chamber means the place that they gathered together. Washington's new government. No one knew if a government based on the will of people could really work, because this was for the first time and there was no example before Washington. So everyone was skeptical about this form of government. What to call president? Number one problem was this: what we should call the elected person. For example, His Excellency, His Highness the President of the United States of America and protector of their liberties, Finally, they came to the point, President of the United States or Mr. President, and it is still named as President of the United States or Mr. President. Washington's new government, Supreme Court, judicial branch. Okay. The Constitution created the Supreme Court but left the details to the new Congress to help answer questions such as what type of additional courts should there be and how many, what would happen if federal court decisions conflicted with state laws were left unquestioned. Later we go to the answer to these questions. To answer these questions, Congress passed the Federal Judiciary Act of 1789, which gave the Supreme Court 6 members, a Chief Justice and 5 Associate Justices. Justice means judge. It allowed states to keep their own court systems, but also added federal courts in each state. Please remember that in present day there are now 9 justices on the Supreme Court. President Washington appointed John Jay as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. As you see, Washington's new government and his cabinet are needed to be concentrated. The Constitution gave Congress the task of developing departments to help presidents. The president lead the nation. Washington chose talented people to lead these departments. Okay, we are going to identify 5 important members of his cabinet, and please remember that it is needed to know all these key figures that later we will start to know more about these literary figures. Historical figures. He called upon these men to advise him on official matters. Secretary of State was Thomas Jefferson was the appointed as the Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of Treasury, Henry Knox as Secretary of War, Edmund Randolph as Attorney General, and John Adams as the Vice President. Alexander Hamilton was the most remarkable person because he held the Secretary of Treasury. He was assigned by President Washington to straighten out the country's finances. So he was the person in charge for financial problems of this nation. During the Revolutionary War, the United States had borrowed millions of dollars from France, Spain, and Netherlands. So this was a problem. Right now it was necessary to pay those loans, but how, it was a matter of question. The United States also owed money to soldiers who were promised payment for their service during the war. The states also had their own wartime debt. The United States debt was over $52 million. Hamilton wanted to pay off these debts to show that the United States was responsible about money and believed that would lead to other nations doing business with the United States. So if he thought that if he pays these debts, other countries will be able to rely on American politics, and they will try to trade with this nation, newly established nation. Hamilton also believed in a strong central government. He wanted the federal government to be stronger than the state governments. So as we see from now on, we are going to see some clashes between him and the other cabinet member, Thomas Jefferson. He also believed that government should encourage business and industry, and the nation's prosperity depended on the support of the nation's wealthy merchants and manufacturers. The government owed these men, and of course Hamilton wanted to pay them back so they would support the new government. The nation's finances. Hamilton had a plan to help the United States economy. Number one, please be careful about these three plans, because most probably you're gonna have questions from these terms, these plans. Number one, I'm sorry. Number one was to pay off all war debts. Number two was to raise United States revenue. And the third and last one was to create a national bank. Hamilton wanted the federal government to also pay off the states' debts from the Revolutionary War. Southern states had a problem with this, but why? Answer is clear. Most southern states almost had their war debts paid off. Now, the lazy northern states were getting their debts paid. Not fair. So they had paid their doubts, but again they were supposed to pay for the doubts of Revolutionary War. They also believe that right now it is the turn of northern people to pay the debts. Compromise. So we come to a plan that it is called compromise to pay the debts. Southern states agreed to the federal government to pay off all the state Revolutionary War debts if the national capital was moved to a southern location. This is why the nation's capital was built in Washington, D.C. Remember, it moved from New York to Washington, D.C. To raise revenue, Hamilton wanted tariffs, which are taxes on imported goods. They served for two purposes, raising money for the government and also encouraging the growth of national business. They wanted to stop importing goods from other nations, especially Europe. Tariffs make foreign goods more expensive, so they encourage people to buy American goods. Hamilton also wanted to create a national bank because national bank was supposed to be a safe place to keep government money. It was also able to make loans to business and government. It also issued banknotes, paper money that could be used as currency. Hamilton's plan would give more power to national government. On the other hand, Thomas Jefferson argued that the bank would create a kind of urge for an unhealthy partnership between the government and wealthy business interests. For example, if we establish the national bank and the people who are in charge of, for example, who are responsible, they may bribe national bank, and there might be a kind of corrupt relation between national bank and these people. Jefferson said that federal government does not have the right to create a national bank since it is not listed in the Constitution. This is seen as a strict interpretation of the Constitution. He used to believe that everything written on the Constitution must be interpreted objectively. Hamilton argued the elastic clause of the Constitution that covered what was necessary and proper for the government to function. President Washington actually tried to stay out of these two characters' arguments, although he sided with Hamilton and the Bank of the United States that was supposed to be established, and finally it was established in 1791. Here you see some of the important terms that might be asked in your midterm or final exam. Federal Judiciary Act, John Jay as the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Attorney General, Cabinet, Inauguration, President, and Tariff. Today's lesson is over. Thank you so much. I will also post some some papers, PDF forms to the class videos. I hope that you would also have time to take a glance at them. Thank you so much and take care of yourself. See you. Goodbye.